Hey, everybody. Welcome to this special episode of the Higher Ed Geek podcast, episode number 180. This episode is special because I'm actually on a panel discussion here with folks from PeakSpan Capital. So I am not hosting. One of their folks, Russell Perkins, is moderating a discussion between me and Socket Merchant, one of the partners at PeakSpan Capital. So a wide-ranging conversation. Really enjoyed being a part of this, talking about everything from admissions and student success and everything in between, and how ed tech and digital tools are impacting the work there, and kind of what are the trend lines that we're following looking at the year ahead. So really appreciate this opportunity. So definitely check out PeakSpan Capital and what they're up to as they support just greater innovation here in the greater ed tech world. So really appreciate them coming together to have this conversation, and appreciate you checking out this episode number 180 with me, Sanket, and Russell.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our higher ed focused roundtable discussion today. We have the pleasure of being joined by Dustin Ramsdell and Sanket Merchant, who will be going through a couple different topics today that I know are top of mind for a lot of people in the broader education ecosystem. So thought we kick it off with a couple quick intros. I'm Russell Perkins. I'll be moderating the discussion today, and I'll hand it off to Dustin to give his quick couple minutes.
The founder and host of the Higher Ed Geek podcast for the past over 5 years. I've been working professionally in the space for, almost 10 years. And I've been podcasting most of that time prior to this with a different show. But yeah, just love having conversations, thinking big about kind of the hot topics of the day and sort of relevant solutions for folks to really focus on kind of the student experience and student success, how they can find effective digital solutions to those modern problems.
First and foremost, thanks for everybody for listening in. My name is Sanket Merchant. I'm a partner at PeakSpan Capital. We're a US-based growth equity firm. We manage about $1.5 billion of capital, have had the privilege of working with over 70 entrepreneurial teams. And at our firm, I lead our education technology, or ed tech, as well as our learning development practice. Those are one of two areas that I spend all of my time. And so we define ed tech as everything from early child education, K-12, higher education, vocational training, and then professional lifelong learning. You know, we're typically working with startups and scale up businesses that are looking to scale from like 3 to 5 million in ARR to 30 million plus. And what that typically means is that, these are businesses that are pioneering innovation and leadership in strategic and emerging categories within education technology. Typically are like 30 to 50 employees at the time that we partner with these entrepreneurs, are helping them kind of navigate the scale up journey through everything from product strategy, really, having a really awesome kind of voice of the customer, understanding the intimate kind of need and pain points of their customers. And so one of the things that we've been excited by is, education technology, at the highest level is vertical software. And one of what I hope is kind of a more progressive approach that we're pioneering here at PeakSpan is looking at the academic institution like the enterprise, right? It is the enterprise. It's composed of multiple stakeholders that, should and rightfully so should be delighted, optimized, should be focusing on the outcomes that we're driving for those key constituents, whether it's faculty, administrators, students, parents, and the like. And so I think, we've been privileged to work with Dustin for the better part, or probably coming up on a couple quarters, if not closing on our first year, and just been amazed by his thought leadership, his pulse on the landscape, and excited. I think it's an exciting time within ed tech. I think there is a lot of progress that we've made, but I think we see a ton of disruption on the horizon, and so excited to have this conversation today.
Thanks for that, Sanket. And I agree with you. I think this is going to be a pretty fruitful and interesting conversation, just given the backgrounds of everyone involved. So I think the first topic I was hoping to cover today is in the area of admissions and enrollment. So I'll throw this one to you, Dustin. How do you think higher ed institutions can differentiate amongst some of the other competitors out there to really tackle the challenge of decreasing enrollment rates?
One just high-arching thing that I feel like I haven't heard a lot of people talk about as much is like, you've seen that the alternative providers that are out there can serve as partners for higher institutions. So like you could look at it as not sort of a like, okay, we have to figure out how to compete with these more, short-term credentials and boot camps and those sort of things. Like they obviously would love to have a higher institution brand as a partner. So I think thinking through opportunities there and figuring out as an institution how to, I think, resist the temptation to try to be all things to all people. I think that, there's regional institutions, community colleges, and the small liberal arts institutions that are all doing something different. And I think they need to lean into that differentiation of like, the academic specialities that they really excel in, and the sort of experience that they want for their students. Because on one hand, I think you're seeing that there are a lot of winners coming out that are achieving a high level of scale of like 30,000 plus students. But um, if you can kind of right size and stay lean, you don't necessarily need to just keep on like growing more and more students every single year, and all, like, because that comes with more complexity. It comes with more, obviously, costs and everything. So if you can kind of, level set and calibrate to what feels like a really good size for what you offer and ability to kind of focus, I think that makes a clear differentiation kind of option for students. Because it happens a lot sort of just in the economy at large, where you start to have kind of duplicitous imaging, like every institution kind of looks like the next one because they're all trying to be like Harvard or something, and it's like, that's just not possible. Like, that's an exceptional institution that's been around for a really long time. But if you can kind of recognize the things that make you unique and kind of lean into those, I think that that's really important. And really honoring the kind of the question is like, how do you differentiate? It's like by being different, like by really leaning into those differences, by sort of recognizing that you don't have to offer every single academic program under the sun. Which ones you have great faculty who are committed and that seem to really resonate with students, and that just align with kind of the your brand and your mission as an institution. So those are the things that kind of come to mind where it's something that I've been thinking a lot about, is sort of like right sizing an institution and sort of calibrating in that way.
And I know focus and specialization is something that is very near and dear to Sankit's heart. So curious to know if you have anything to respond to there.
No, it's no, I appreciate I'm chuckling at that. No, I think what Dustin said is spot on, and I think especially when you look at it on a relative basis, like what the alternative paths are now available to the modern learner, the modern student, and I think that we have to break ourselves from this like conventional view of what is the demographic of a student, right? I mean, I think we've seen this with professional learning, lifelong learning. It's really evolving. The advancements around different programs that are available out there, these boot camps, specialized kind of skills development programs, I think are amazing. I think what I come back to is, one, this is a systemic issue for universities, and maybe you're just approaching it from a slightly different angle to complement Dustin's response. But one is, what I was research we've been doing and things that we've been seeing is that over half of the revenue that a university, college, or school, receives is through tuition, right? So like, one, this is a huge part of the revenue model. It's absolutely critical. And a part of that is like they're seeing depletion in units of enrollments, but also like the composition of those enrollments, right? And I think that's all due to kind of the impact of COVID. I think what it comes down to, from my perspective, is, one, it's an absolute critical problem. Every academic leader is talking about this. They're focused on it. Solutions in the edtech ecosystem are anchoring around this in terms of value propositions. But I think it comes down to, from my perspective, three things. One is student experience, what we're doing to drive student support, and then student outcomes, right? And I think at the end of the day, I was reading some research recently that like some of the top, universities like Harvard and UPenn and Princeton and the like are starting to latch onto this idea of divorcing themselves from the national college rankings. And what you're seeing here is, whether it's universities themselves or nonprofits, philanthropic organizations starting to measure the success of an institution by the social and economic mobility that they're offering. And so I think this is just a really awesome paradigm shift in terms of creating kind of sustainable differentiation, which is, what outcomes are you driving for students? What are you doing to transform their lives post college? And so I think that's where it comes down to: are we delivering a best in class experience for the students? Are we being able to provide visibility on outcomes that we're driving, providing prescriptive pathways as to how different academic programs lead to outcomes? How does that fare in terms of outplacement, in terms of career success, career trajectory, earnings mobility, social mobility? And I think the other thing I would just call out too is like, I don't know that there's clear data on this, but I was looking at a recent study and it said that 60% of college students qualify with one component of a mental health illness, or what is a description of mental health issues, And that's terrifying. I'm the father. I've got twin boys at 3.5 years old. One of the things that I love about EdTech is our ability as growth investors to be able to change the trajectory of the experience that our kids and the next generation of students are going to have. And so to see the toll that mental health has had on propensity or willingness to go explore post-secondary education, I think is really concerning. So I agree with Dustin 100%. I think that this goes back to kind of my opening remarks. Like, we're early in the innings of this. Like, if we used a baseball analogy, I feel like we're in the bottom of the first, top of the second in terms of how universities, colleges are thinking about their businesses like the enterprise. But ultimately, there's got to be a recalibration on what are we doing to drive student experience, student outcomes, that I think is going to be the long-term success of saying we can thrive with these other emerging academic programs and pathways. But there is a level of accountability in terms of, our value is no longer just purely our brand, right? It'll be a while before it's fully like kind of divorced, but I think what we're seeing is a movement in that direction.
You've almost certainly heard of Slate, one of the most powerful admission CRMs on the market. And you may have also heard of HubSpot, a dynamic and robust marketing CRM that is second to none when it comes to marketing and full funnel reporting. But have you heard of HubSlate? HubSlate is a two-way data sync between HubSpot and Slate that ensures consistency of data and information for prospective, current, and former students. Gone are the days of list uploads, checking multiple platforms for the most up-to-date information, or having to pull multiple reports in order to get a sense of your entire enrollment funnel. With HubSlate, you'll be able to work smarter, more efficiently, and without all of the stress that comes with managing contact records. It's 2023. It's about time that you let your systems work for you. If you want to learn more about HubSlate or see a demo, visit enrollify.org/HubSlate. That's enrollify.org/HubSlate, and you'll instantly qualify for 20% off the onboarding fee. Now, on to the show.
Yeah, I think that concept of a status quo, this is how it's always been done, this is just the rules. I think that is a really harmful thing going forward. And I think, I don't want to lead the witness here, but I would love to hear, Dustin, your thoughts just around what do you think of the current state of recruiting, admissions, enrollment? Is it working as is? Is it something where we can make some changes and it will get fixed going forward? Or is it something you think we need to fully retool and just is inherently broken at this point?
Yeah, I mean, on one hand, just from like what Sanket was saying, like a lot of my experiences in like student success, student support, and retention and everything. So I love it. I think there's going to be a much more renewed focus on that moving forward because I think there was so much kind of focus and attention on the kind of top of the funnel and recruiting students and everything. But now, as sort of I think the pendulum is swinging the other way, there's kind of the reckoning of like, okay, I think we do need to investigate and sort of kind of kick the tires, look under the hood of like how we have recruited students where, when, the good times were rolling and students were plentiful, you didn't necessarily have to really kind of revamp what you're doing. But I think there's just now an opportunity and certainly a necessity, kind of an urgency around helping to make sure that students are able to make better informed choices about how they're choosing their higher ed options, where they can find a better social and academic and financial fit. Because I think you sometimes see that students are kind of maybe overly sort of bottlenecking towards those few, name brand sort of high end academic options, where there could be a lot of other places that could be an amazing option for them, where they could get, a full ride and have great outcomes and those sort of things, versus, some other places like they're not doing a lot to innovate because they don't have to, like that they're always going to have a plentiful pipeline of students, and the students maybe that do end up even going there also don't need a lot of support because they're highly resourced and that sort of thing. So I think for the students who are first generation and underrepresented and adult learners and commuters and online students and all these sort of things, like there's a lot of opportunity to help those students make well-informed decisions for really truly best fit institutions that may not have been on the radar before. They might be kind of these diamonds in the roughs, kind of the needles in the haystack, and kind of uplifting them, and really just trying to kind of clear up what I think is sort of needlessly complicated admissions processes. So if it is, again, if you're finding partnership opportunities with a maybe alternative education provider or something. It's like they complete this boot camp, they're able to start working, maybe they get a funding mechanism through that, but then they get preferred admission or sort of an ease of entry into getting their bachelor's degree, or more sort of like direct admissions, or not having certain things be how you're evaluating prospective students to be a good fit for your institution. Because and a lot of this I've been learning a lot from the work of Vioka Hoy from Bridge to College. She's been I've interviewed my podcast last year, and I've just been continuing to talk with her because she's been kind of educating me on this side where like I've just had a lot of kind of blind spots in sort of the enrollment side of things. But like something that really stuck with me is that idea of like a lot of institutions will look for calculus on students' high school transcripts, and a lot of high schools don't offer it. And so they think like, oh, you didn't take calculus. Like, why didn't you do that? You weren't like interested or something? It's like my high school literally doesn't offer it. And you see that class as like a barometer for like my, potential success at your institution, those sort of things. So it's like you can make these sort of pivots with policies like that, and just also make investments in digital tools and platforms to better position yourself so that students can more easily find you, versus like everybody kind of dogpiling on to like Google ads or something for, so sort of search results. So those are some things that come to mind where I think there's a lot of opportunity to fix a somewhat broken status quo for admissions.
And Dustin, that's actually really funny because I was chuckling there because what you described there with that calculus class is exactly kind of describes like my high school. I went to high school in a small little town in the middle of America in Southeast Colorado. Entire city population was 750 people. My high school graduating class was 24. And not for lack of enthusiasm, willingness to do things, but there was a lot of restrictions in terms of, what our high school could support, both from, the demand side in terms of were there a lot of students that wanted to take those classes and what were their academic, aspirations. And then two is like, just as a school district, like, do they have the resource to be able to support some of these programs, and candidly not having the educators to be able to do that, right? And so for this little kid from Southeast Colorado who wants to go to an awesome university that is being measured against students at other schools that may have those access to those resources, those programs, yeah, how do you compare? You've heard about international baccalaureate and programs, and I had no idea what that was until I went to the University of Colorado and realized like that's a huge thing. So I couldn't agree more with that.
Yeah, I think it's a really unique point where the back end kind of management and infrastructure of, a 20 to 50 person graduating class and a, multiple thousand person university. Some of those schools and universities are going to have some of the same challenges, and some of them are going to have very different challenges. So Dustin, I'd love to get your expertise on this. How have you felt that colleges have historically handled campus-wide commission, student engagement, and digital infrastructure in the past? And I guess maybe some of the things that you're seeing as potentially innovative in a space where there are some common needs, but also some very different requirements.
Yeah, I mean, my hopeful aspiration, which I think is unfortunately somewhat lofty, is creating more of like a unified campus-wide like student information system or CRM, like those sort of things, so that like that database of students, who's interacting with them, when and why, could be much more kind of ubiquitous and common. Because I think you've seen that the School of Business has their one way of doing things and all that, even in one institution, especially for bigger ones. So if everybody could be kind of like working towards the same point or using that same system and maybe kind of riffing on it in a unique way, but they're still kind of like speaking kind of a similar language, that would be huge for me. And just generally that kind of way to integrate systems better together, so they work better together, where you have communications platforms to do, mass texting or, text back and forth with students, or, have phone calls and different things be able to all be logged really easily, that you're communicating with students. So we know sort of, how often these students have been communicated with. And a lot of this also, admittedly comes from my background of working as a coach, and all of that being like so helpful for me in my work directly with students, and just wanting that, I think, for more students and for more staff members. But even with that, I love to see in terms of like student engagement and digital investments and everything, stuff like chatbots to make communication more efficient and kind of optimized, so that those frequently asked questions can be kind of engaged with more actively. But then if there is something unique, it can be escalated. creating more kind of seamless mobile experiences. I think you've just seen a lot of improvement there, and I'd love to see just continued iteration on really, optimized mobile experiences. But I think just generally through all that kind of threaded through is ideally being able to personalize communication in both the content and modality for different stakeholders. So that can be prospective students, current students, alumni, parents, and those sort of things, that if they like they're getting information about things they need to do and different tasks, and if they prefer to get email, they prefer to get a text message, they prefer to get a phone call or something, we know that, and we sort of work towards catering to that. That doesn't mean that they never will get an email, that doesn't mean they never will get a text message if they prefer a phone call or something. But if it's like, I really need to get a hold of the student, they prefer evening phone calls, I will do that, and trying to kind of create sort of the infrastructure of staffing and all these different things. It's definitely a lot sort of implicit in this, but to try to reach these increasingly working adult learners who are studying maybe fully online or hybrid, and all that, to kind of just personalize their outreach, get them the information that they need the way that they prefer to get it.
Yeah, and I know in the past couple of years, infrastructure as a whole, whether it's how the school is going to be run, how the instruction is going to be delivered, any number of things has undergone a pretty big upheaval. And Sanket, I was wondering if there were any particular areas that you've seen where a specific category or a specific type of tool within ed tech has really changed this status quo of how do I manage the back end infrastructure, of my institution.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And before I maybe jump to that, I want to like vehemently agree with like Dustin on that point. I mean, I think there's like two, one of the unique vantage points we have is having seen more progressive approaches in other kind of like ancillary pockets of like the software ecosystem. And so when I think about like, online education, blended learning's here to stay, but that's not too dissimilar from how we thought about like the monstrous rise in remote work. Or if you look at like, could you imagine a world where you're working for an organization where one team is using Slack, another team is using a different asynchronous communication tool? It would be mayhem. And so I think at the end of the day, like, I feel like our brothers and sisters in the academic in the academic world, I'm a bit removed from having experienced these problems like firsthand myself. But I think a couple things that like stick out to me there that I'm excited by, and I know our team is super excited by, and talking to a bunch of cool entrepreneurs that are doing some cool stuff in these areas. But one is, I think is one, there has to be a ubiquitous experience. There's so many kind of pillars and pockets of experiences that happen on campus, or even in a digital campus, right? And I feel like every school is kind of operating with its own, or every like department is operating with its own silos. If you're participating in like I was a part of a ton of like student government, I was a part of different social kind of community groups, right? And there was no single place to go to be able to have visibility across all the different experiences that the campus had to offer, right? And so when I think about businesses like Pathify, for example, that are offering what is kind of a modern intranet for a university campus, so that students have visibility from everything from their academic pathways, journeys, and experiences to on-campus resources through career services, through mental health services, through like groups that they might be participating in, events that they're having on campus, sporting events. Like I think that's amazing to be able to provide students with what I call like the integral system of record, which is, it's effectively a system of record that sits across disparate systems of record and systems of engagement to provide visibility. And I think that's amazing in terms of driving best in class student experience. And I think what's interesting is, and Dustin, he's been in the seat firsthand, but also probably knows a ton of folks. But we are now, as we talk to university leaders, we're seeing more roles around director, VP, and above of student experience, not just student affairs. And I think that is showing, that to me is a really interesting predictive indicator as to, one, recognition of criticality and importance, but two is just prioritization, right? And I think there are going to be a ton of ed tech tools that benefit from that. The second thing that I think is interesting too is like we saw this in our investment in Arist, right? So it's a text-based micro learning solution, but is this shift towards, one is, and we see this across enterprise software just generally, but is meeting the user in the flow of work, right? So how do these student populations, educators, faculty members, learners, how do they want to operate? Where do they spend their time? It's on a mobile device. So just thinking in mind, like to be able to drive an awesome experience, one, it should be mobile centric. You need to cater to the flow of work for those individuals. And so I think, Dustin, what you were talking about in terms of, having, mobile centricity at the core of your organization, thinking about text-based approaches, consolidating communication, whether it's with parents or with students, like I think that all makes a ton of sense. And we're seeing a lot of cool companies that are helping kind of pioneer that across the university, which is really, really exciting. And I think the last thing I would just call it on that front that I think should be a priority, I don't have a lot of data to kind of like support it, but is this notion that like if you've got online education programs, the pride, the ambition or enthusiasm in me says like you have a digital university with all this portfolio of awesome experiences, and shame on us if we're not providing the same like parity and experience to those learners, right? And I think about that. We see that with remote work. We have a number of our companies in our portfolio that are remote only. And I would hope that none of those entrepreneurs concede the fact that we can't create a best in class experience, even if our office walls are digital walls, right? And so I think having, institutions kind of think about it from that vantage point is going to be super important. I think, Russell, to your question on the infrastructure side, I think there are a couple of things that I just keep thinking about. And ultimately it comes down to, it's our sense across like ed tech broadly, there's been a lot of like digital fatigue. I think a lot of folks are like blended learning is here to stay. Tools are here to stay. We are absolutely bullish. Like the totality of ed tech spend is enormous and education services is enormous. But I think about my kids and say like, gosh, would I want them on an iPad for 8 hours a day? Probably not. I mean, I see what happens when they watch a video and I stop the video, right? It's absolute mayhem. So, I think we just, whether it's Chat GPT or, other different, emerging technologies, like, I think adaptability, adaptation is going to be paramount in terms of just how do we work with emerging technologies, but maintain the integrity of kind of academic standards and some of the more brick and mortar synchronous experiences. That's one. And then two is like, there's amazing tools that when put together thoughtfully with strong interoperability, good governance, compliance, security, really fulfill this idea of like 1+1 = 3. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges for a lot of universities, that they've got amazing tools, but the infrastructure is just not there. And so I think whether it's being able to provide prescriptive learning pathways, like I don't like a lot of this metadata, a lot of this learner data exists, but it's in siloed systems. And I'm not sure that, today you're seeing the large concentration, the fat part of the distribution curve, the bell curve of, schools leveraging, kind of data intelligence to drive some of the outcomes and some of the experiences that they could, right? And I think for me personally, like that's an area that we are as a firm really excited by, because I think the sophistication, there are tools that you can cobble together, whether it's an ETL, looking at data warehouse, data lakehouse, to be able to like, envision what a future in terms of data intelligence could look like and how those affect the different applications and use cases within your university. But I don't mean this in a, I guess part of the cynical side of me is that it just requires a lot of resource, a lot of time. And I'm just not sure that the IT teams, the office of the CIO, the office of the CTO has the resource, the bandwidth to think about this as strategically. And so I think one of the greatest opportunities for ed tech businesses is, how can you, one, recognize these pain points, these opportunities as you have done, but really focus on, out of the box kind of use cases, rapid time to value, being able to help, I think, remove some of the friction that exists on that like a lot of the school leaders are having to burden themselves to get to this vision of what the future could look like, if that makes sense. And so it's like, instead of like, providing all the key ingredients, what folks want when they go into the pastry shops, they want the cake. Can you deliver the cake? Right. And I think that the fruits of that, the rewards of that approach I think are going to be massive.
I totally agree. And to your point, that point of access or ability to go into the pastry shop, I think is very key and is going to be different for students from different backgrounds, students with different academic levels, students with different goals. And so, Dustin, what would you say that some of the issues might be for students that lack access or knowledge of these types of campus resources, mentorships, support systems, things like that?
Well, and I love everything that you're saying, Sanket. I appreciate the tip of the hat to Pathify and just generally, yeah, this philosophy of like created the moniker of is like a digital first university where like we're not trying to say like everything's going to be online and all that, but like you said, it's like a lot of companies have to think that way of like how are we thinking digital first and how it can maybe kind of augment the work that's happening in person or synchronously and those sort of things. I think universities are on a similar path, but whether a student's online or not, I think if they are experiencing those gaps of supports and the high quality, high impact practices and different things around, mentorships or anything else, like, it's the same thing. And, creating these kind of comparison points and metaphors, which I love, like, you think about if you're trying to buy something and you hit sort of hurdles and roadblocks and friction and all that, like you're probably just going to bail out and not buy that thing or buy it from somewhere else. Like it's that sort of student experience thing where if students are getting confused, turned around, can't find the information they need on the website, can't get in contact with anybody, they are likely to get frustrated and stop out, and that they may return to your institution or somewhere else or not at all. And that's definitely like a huge issue that a lot of people are trying to tackle is to how to kind of bring those people back in and give them those supports that they need, be successful, especially, for your first generation students and for working adult learners and those sort of things who just have a very complex lives and they just don't have a lot of time to be waiting around or trying to figure things out and all of that. But the other part of it is like, you have these students who are likely going to end up like making decisions in a vacuum if they don't have the actual answer, the right information, or they're not hearing back from people, or they're like, asking their peers and they're getting kind of the game of telephone of like, well, I heard this, or I think you're supposed to do that and all that, like they could likely just be wrong about like, oh, this course counts for this or that in my degree plan. Or at best, they're just being kind of grossly inefficient with their higher ed degree progress and everything, or just going through with their like time studying if like they could have gotten connected with a tutor and optimized an hour's worth of study time with them versus spending 4 hours sort of muscling and struggling their way through to try to understand a concept, or kind of the worst case scenario around like your degree progress, like they take courses that are essentially like a waste of time or don't count, or they could have like doubled or triple dipped of like their different degree requirements and those sort of things and save time and money. So those are the things that come to mind when you just sort of like, we've built it, they will come here and it's fine, whatever. And then you just kind of have students sort of scrambling. And there's those few sort of like, high achieving, highly resourced students who can like find their own private tutor, don't mind spending as much time, at their higher institution because like they're not paying, and taking on like debt or something. So, for learners, we're seeing that time and cost and, what am I getting out of this are so important. So we need to kind of scaffold them to get to that endpoint, because unfortunately, especially if you're, studying for a bachelor's, like it doesn't do you any good if you got 95% of the way there. Like you need to get kind of all the way, and we need to make sure that we're seeing those students through with this variety of resources of, mentors and campus resources and everything.
And Sanket, have you seen any specific areas or types of ed tech solutions that really help with this problem of access or knowledge?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to, I mean, we certainly have, right? And I think at the stage that we're looking at, companies are hyper focused. And so they're not trying to be everything to everyone, but trying to attack an acute pain point, which I think is a key ingredient to success. I think I love what Dustin said. And I think, it made me kind of reflect back on my own kind of college experience. And there was like small things like, a service on campus at the University of Colorado at Boulder where you could go in and get like different like you could do like meditation, or you could get these like relaxation oils when you were like studying for finals that like no one, I mean, I just heard through the grapevine about, but it's like it's such a weird small thing, but it's just like there's no visibility, right? I don't know that. So there's a couple things that stick out to me on that topic. Is one is there awareness? Is there visibility across these amazing, programs and services that are being funded and supported across the campus. That's one. The second thing I think about on this topic is you're going to have like a small, I think population of students that like are going to take the initiative and are going to go to try to find that like nuance like service or program on campus, are going to be spending every day at career services. I know a lot of friends were like that. I hope I was. I'd like to think I was that guy, but I certainly was not. And it was more kind of point in time and need based. But it's like there are folks that like really took advantage of those services like proactively. I think there are a lot of folks that were maybe some folks that are aware of the services didn't take the initiative because they lacked the context. And then I think a large population. I mean, university like Boulder had probably close to like 40 or 45,000 students across both graduate and undergraduate programs, large international population, et cetera. And so I think all to say, I think going back to an earlier topic around what is, are we oriented around the right barometers of success, student outcomes, impact, et cetera. I think if there is good visibility on what outcomes, what are we trying to affect, that I think you provide context to the career services and different programs that are available on campus that students can utilize to understand, how do I get from path A to path B? If we have good visibility, and there's actually a really cool company based out of New York called EdSites, and I think what they're doing in terms of like using intelligent chatbots, cognitive and behavioral data to predict students that are at need, students that are at risk of, unenrolling, attriting out of the university. I think that's profound, right? I think that's the kind of stuff that I think is amazing, which is like, being able to leverage data, being able to leverage pathways to understand, one, how to contextualize different resources that are available, but two is how to think about more proactive interactions, leveraging technology, data intelligence to provide a connection to a counselor, right? Or to be able to provide career services support, right? To be able to connect them with communities and groups on campus. And so that's like my perspective around it. I just think that, one, visibility solves that problem, but I think what's truly missing is really context. And I think as we start to like progress down this like evolution and how systems talk to one another, what visibility there is, kind of how universities orient around, what is kind of a unified view of success. I think they're going to find a really effective way to stretch dollars and just get more attach and take rate on these awesome programs that a lot of these universities, that deliver and provide for the students. And I think one of the things that's so exciting for me in ed tech is like, these are human beings at the end of the day, right? It's not just software for incremental innovation. Like it's helping someone at a moment of need, before they need help, right? Or helping someone kind of mobilize and get to an outcome that otherwise might be challenging, right? And so I think the tools that we're kind of seeing and what we're talking about, I think are going to be really powerful in terms of helping affect some of that stuff.
Well, and for me, like, it's kind of a joke of like why I love still working in education and can't imagine working anywhere else, where like you said, it's like it's impacting people's lives who are trying to better themselves and pursue their goals versus like trying to help people buy socks better or something, where it's just like, that's all well and good, that's important, but for me
We
personally,
like good socks.
yeah, like, and it's like that's someone else's job and they're gonna do great at that and that's their thing, that's whatever. But I'm like, yeah, like I want to just keep kind of like working on that problem, like how do we better equip people to better support these students who are achieving their goals. And just to give a sort of bold and underline to like something like EdSites, where like I've gone without that, trying to support students and try to discern and kind of read tea leaves of like, oh, I think this person needs my help, I don't know, like, or have people kind of really scratch their heads of just like, we're trying to build this with what we have, but it's kind of like, not totally effective, or it's just taking a lot of time and resources to develop that. So I'm glad that there are folks on out there trying to build something like that. Because it's absolutely crucial to try to help again kind of bridge that gap. If I'm sort of flailing here and I'm kind of like treading water, it's like, okay, let's identify you and really target outreach to the people who it's going to be most beneficial to.
I agree. And Dustin, one thing I'll say, Russell, before you jump in here, I love that last comment. I think that's like, when we talk about headwinds facing ed tech, it's the fact that I don't know that it's relative to other professional opportunities. People are like, there's a flight towards, oh my God, I want to be working for, a school or a district, or an academic institution. I think that's one of the headwinds is that this industry is facing, is the fact that there's a flight away from it. And so there's like, I think, even if universities are doing amazing, amazing things, they're battling resource constraint. And I think that's like one of the areas, whether it's, we see this in SLE programs for like K through 12, is like, how can you enable those professionals that are providing these amazing programs support on campus? How can we allow them to have a greater and further reaching effect? And I think software is really amazing at doing that, right? Because ultimately, like Dustin, there's only, if you're in that seat, there's only so many people you can talk to in a given day, right? Are you focused on the right conversation at the right time with the right person? And so, yeah, I think that's amazing.
And that accessibility piece is so crucial for anything that we're discussing today. If you're building a tool and no one's using it, what good is building the tool? But I think for some of the people that maybe have an experience or a path where the traditional higher education ecosystem doesn't really make sense for them, I feel like in some of our research, we've been seeing that today versus even a year or 2 years ago, there are a lot of other alternative career paths available. And so, Dustin, I wanted to get your input on, just one, if you agree with that, two, maybe some areas that you think have really stood out to you as being fruitful from an accomplishment perspective and prosperous as well.
A lot of people have been struggling to figure out over the years, like how to make like a boot camp model work. Like I think you've seen some kind of come up and fade away and all that. I've always been fascinated by it and think it's such a great model. But I do think, again, just to sort of encourage more people to think this way, is like, I do think it may need to be sort of anchored or offshoot, and maybe sort of like for kind of a parallel for people, like kind of like a continuing education model. Like there's a lot of schools of professional studies or continuing education that sort of is like an island, and anymore has become sort of a crucial island for subject matter expertise and engaging adult learners and online education, all that. I think, and I hope, I guess, more so, like that boot camps become sort of part of the family, in a sense of like, we want this to be kind of like slid into kind of the continuum of learning, to where that can be a really great pathway in for students. And sort of similarly, the digital certifications stuff you're seeing coming out of like Google and AWS and stuff is just another way where it's like somebody can kind of reach a milestone credential and certification that can get them kind of gainfully employed, and especially at a corporation that likely will pay for their continuing education beyond that to get further, bachelor's, master's, and all that, and can just really start kind of this like, kind of ability to kind of ride along the rails and kind of move their career forward. And whether they stay at that place forever or not, they can kind of start to be in a place where you have a quick, low cost option that enables you to then pursue further education, at low or no cost to you, because your employer is helping to kind of pay for things. So really love those options. And then another sort of radical one that I'm starting to kind of acclimate to is like gap years, like that being an intentional thing. I think we saw that sort of fully emerge, this sleeping dragon kind of wake up during the pandemic, where some people were like, I don't want to study online. Like that was not what I wanted to do. So how about I like bide my time and try to do something else productive while I wait to be able to have the college experience that I envisioned for myself. So there's a lot of organizations out there that are creating those for students. And I think, again, if that can be included in sort of a like leadership experiential learning office at institution, where like we will give you deferred admission and you sort of do something, sort of some sort of kind of guided curriculum or experience or something, and maybe we give you credit for that too. But like, I'm just imagining, again, that wouldn't be kind of the most lofty or sort of like intangible right now, but I've like started to talk with some folks and I'm like, yeah, that is kind of interesting, because like, whether it is like that idea of like, oh, I can't get in, and it's sort of the institution being like, we have to defer your admission, but here's what we can give you, is sort of this like gap year option. Or it's students intentionally just saying like, I'm just going to put this off for a year. I want to kind of, do some self-discovery and then be able to parlay that, towards some, credit institution. So those are things that I'm kind of keeping my eye on in terms of alternative career paths for students that sort of exist outside or just sort of on the outskirts, depending on which organization you might choose to sort of engage with to pursue those. So I do think there's a lot of great potential there, though.
Yeah, I totally agree. And on the ed tech side of things, maybe more on the platform side, Sanket, have you seen any particular areas where a software platform or solution has enabled vocational education, maybe an externship or like a workforce enablement initiative?
Yeah, no, I'm gonna try to exercise brevity on this. Dustin, I agree with you, and I think scratches at themes that we've been tracking around. One, just I think we're part of the learning economy, right? And I think the a lot of what you're talking about, there's a really mature landscape around knowledge workers, right? And I think that it's really exciting, right? Whether it's corporation sponsored, whether it's independent, you're using a Coursera, a Udemy, it's self-directed. There's a ton of cool platforms out there um, to connect to communities and mentors and things like that. So I won't hit on that. I guess the one thing I've been tracking is, one of my dear friends is a partner at McKinsey, and part of what he leads, one of the initiatives he leads is, workforce enablement. The reality is that like there is two observations. One is I think not surprising that when we're in the middle of challenging economic environments, there's a flight towards education, right? And I think the reality is that like globalization is real, and the reality is that like the US economy isn't equipped with the right skills to be successful in the years ahead, right? So I think there's going to be a big shift towards workforce enablement, trying to solve for the skills gaps that we see across the economy outside of the knowledge economy. And I think that's what, Russell, you're kind of scratching at with vocational education. I think that's an area within the broader umbrella of education technology, the education and learning economy that is underserved, right? You think about hard skills, folks in the HVAC industry, electricians, plumbers, you think about like beauticians as cosmetologists, and there's so many trade skills out there where, um, one, spend is huge, two is criticality is absolutely huge, where three, there's an amazing gainful employment opportunities out there that you're going to see a lot of, you know, Americans, North Americans, Europeans, folks across the globe that are going to go down these kind of quote unquote non-conventional learning paths to acquire certain skills, to upskill and to reskill themselves to be competitive in the future kind of labor environment. And I think what that is going to do is create some awesome disruption and innovation in terms of how are we taking some of the innovation we've seen across K-12 higher education and applying it there, right? In terms of tools to drive student engagement or tools to help with back office management, the SIS for vocational institutions, how we think about payments and financing and things like that. How do we think about outplacement success and the like? And so we don't see a ton of ed tech companies going after that, but I think if we're taking a step back and saying outside of like the learning economy is a diverse economy, it is certainly there's a lot of concentration with knowledge workers, but what about the rest of the workforce, right? The rest of the folks that are trying to reskill because automation is certainly impacting how they think about their livelihood today, right? Or globalization is affecting their livelihood today, right? So that's one thing on that piece. And then the only other thing I would just call out is just to complement what Dustin said is this concept of externships. And I think the reality is that corporations, rightfully so, are really holding themselves accountable around their ESG policies, DEI initiatives, and partnering with universities in terms of, as a part of we think about outplacement success, creating social and economic mobility, like how are they working with students from underrepresented backgrounds to provide access and opportunity. And I think there are cool platforms like Paragon One out there that are working with large corporations, partnering with on the demand side, and on the supply side, working with universities across the US and perhaps even across the globe to be able to provide, I think, one is operate as the conduit to drive an outcome that I think we all could be really, really excited about across verticals and across industries. But then two is to really be able to help facilitate that in a way that removes a lot of the administrative and kind of execution burden from either the university or from the corporation. And so I think it's innovation like that I think is going to help, one, drive the outcomes that we want, but two is I think help facilitate a much more dynamic outlook or view of how we get to skills acquisition, right? And I think that's one of the things I would just maybe as a closing point, I think I'm really excited by is, and I was talking to my wife about this, I think the days of looking at Sunkith and saying, Sunkith is a unit of labor, right, is long behind us. They're going to look, I think when we think about workforce planning, when we think about workforce enablement, people are going to look at Sunkit as a collection of skills, right? And I possess different strengths, different weaknesses, different skills. Like one is, how do we get to a composite view as to what skills that Sunkit has? And when I think about my organization, my business, my academic institution, what are the skills that we want to, from a planning perspective, we want to are required for our organization to be successful? And then how do we mobilize skills development more effectively to help fulfill the requirements of the organization? And so I put it back into a learning context because it does, I think if you are a professional learner looking at these boot camps, but I think you're going to get to a place where you can self-identify what are the skills that you're missing that you want to acquire, or, if it is from a higher ed knowledge worker perspective, looking at your core curriculum and looking at outplacement success, understanding what are some of the requisite skills required for folks to be successful in finance and engineering and pharmaceuticals or whatever it might be, and helping equip students with the resource and the programs and the experiences to build that inventory of skills to be successful as they leave the university setting.
And I just was hoping to wrap up here with a few closing thoughts on generally the higher ed ecosystem and some of the topics that we discussed today. So I'll give you the first opportunity here, Dustin.
Yeah, I mean, I think just in closing, I'm an eternal optimist. I think that there's such a lot of opportunity for institutions, during this moment that feels sort of very ambiguous, very confusing, and certainly there's some fatigue. I think there's just an opportunity to better take care of people, both staff, faculty, and students, give them the supports they need to be successful, give them the tools they need to be successful, and just rethink what's possible and almost just kind of use our imagination, just really be inspired to continue to iterate and innovate in higher education, because the work is so important. We need to have this sort of learner economy and sort of opportunities for people to build skills and build futures for themselves. And I'm just really excited to see what's going to come of this moment, where it seems like it might be kind of a quiet before I'm hoping a very active future where everybody's able to kind of recalibrate and re-envision their goals and start working towards them, and working with their kind of great ed tech partners and other folks to help kind of achieve that.
I think the future is incredibly promising. I think one market opportunity is absolutely massive. I think the importance of education is incredibly durable, even if our definition of what is higher education is evolving. It's here to stay. And I think the reality is that you've got a ton of key ecosystem stakeholders that care deeply about driving a better future. And one thing I'm really excited by is the shift towards equitability, right? It feels like we're moving in the right direction in terms of key priorities and outlook, which is awesome. And, if you look at, one is you've got folks that are bought in, folks that are certainly recognize the headwinds, but see the opportunity. I think, when you're in moments of time where there's intense pressure, either you crumble or a diamond emerges out of that. And just like Dustin, I think we're forever optimists and believe that we're going to see a ton of diamonds emerge out of this. And I think from our perspective as an investor, it's awesome just to see the amount of capital resource that has gone into the edtech ecosystem. It's certainly not what it was in 2020, as a lot of the kind of quote unquote vacation edtech investors have kind of fled the market. But there's a lot of capital and folks that are out there that are trying to support the ecosystem, whether it is from a policy setting perspective, from a capital perspective. And so I think the future is bright, and a lot of folks that are unwilling to accept anything but that reality. And so we're excited to see what happens.
Well, thank you, Dustin and Sunkit, for lending your time and expertise. I think the conversation was super beneficial and wide-reaching. So really appreciate everyone's time who joined us today, and looking forward to any discussions in the future. Thanks, y'all.
Awesome. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Hey, y'all, Zach here from Enrollify. If you like this podcast, chances are you'll like other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing by the month, and we've got a plethora of marketing, admissions, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks that are all designed to empower you to become a better higher ed professional. Our shows feature a selection of the industry's best as your hosts, Learn from Mickey Baines, Jeremy Tiers, Jaime Hunt, Corynn Myers, Jaime Gleason, and many, many more. You can learn more about the Enrollify Podcast Network at podcasts.enrollify.org. Our shows help higher ed marketers and admissions professionals find their next big idea. Find yours at podcasts.enrollify.org.